Yeah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, as my mother would say, all good things to those who wait. And you have been patient, and we appreciate that. Thank you for joining us today for what promises to be a terrific conversation with the Assistant Secretary of State, Brian Nichols. I have very brief setup remarks, then Brian will give comments from the podium, then we will engage in what is euphemistically called a Davos-style discussion, and then we'll have the opportunity for engagement with the Assistant Secretary. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Council of the Americas for our conversation today with the Assistant Secretary of State for the Western Hemisphere, Ambassador Brian A. Nichols. I'm Eric Farnsworth. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to preside at this very important council meeting today. I also want to thank all of you for joining us in person, and we do have quite an audience online, and we thank you for joining us as well. This promises to be a terrific conversation with a true friend of the Americas, a good friend of all of ours, and indeed our co-host for the 54th Annual Washington Conference on the Americas. When the Biden administration took office in 2021, it offered a new international agenda. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan calls it foreign policy for the middle class. U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai speaks often of a worker-centric trade policy designed to grow the economy from the bottom up and the inside out. At the same time, the administration also promised a new priority on the Americas and a new direction for the Americas, which makes sense because no region impacts middle-class voters in the United States more consequentially than the Americas. Not Europe, not Asia, not the Middle East, not Africa, or anywhere else. In fact, the president's national security strategy even says this. Just think about the issues facing the lives of our citizens right now: job creation and the strength of the economy. Migration surges both from and through the region. Fentanyl and illegal narcotics. Access to critical minerals and other materials driving a cleaner energy revolution. Climate change. These are the domestic issues that people talk about in their families and schools and around their kitchen tables. These are the topics that occupy us and often concern us. And they're precisely the issues which are impacted most directly by the Americas. In my view, you cannot have an effective foreign policy for the middle class or develop an economy from the inside out without prioritizing the Americas. It's just not possible. And that's why I'm so pleased to have the opportunity today to introduce our speaker and to moderate the conversation that will follow, because Ambassador Nichols is one of those who gets it. I've known Brian since we served together at the State Department in the early 1990s. I won't tell you how old we were at the time, but it was a lot younger than we were now. He's forged an impressive State Department career with service in Mexico, Colombia, El Salvador, Caribbean issues, and elsewhere. He was principal deputy in the Bureau of Narcotics and Law Enforcement, and most recently, he's been the U.S. ambassador to Peru and then to Zimbabwe. He's now served as Assistant Secretary, the top U.S. diplomat for the Americas, since September 2021. Brian's expertise has been on full display, recently leading U.S. efforts to midwife democratic transition, both in Guatemala and also Brazil, for example, while raising the bar on regional partnerships more generally. He's thoughtful and effective. He's well-liked, and indeed, I would say admired across the region. And I'm pleased to have the opportunity to call him a personal friend. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in for a treat this afternoon. Please join me in welcoming back to the Council of the Americas the Honorable Brian A. Nichols.
Thank you. So good afternoon, and Eric, thank you for that wonderful introduction. It was so genuine and earnest, I almost believed it myself. I am incredibly grateful to be with you to address such an august group, and I'm incredibly thankful to all of you for your patience as we were working through and continue to work through some incredibly difficult issues related to our region, in this case, Haiti in particular. I think it's a sign perhaps of hubris that I'm with you today, just hours ahead of the President's State of the Union address. But it's an opportunity to outline our approach in realizing his vision for a hemisphere that's more democratic, more secure, more prosperous, and more inclusive. Given the Council of the Americas' longstanding commitment to the same goals, I cannot think of a more fitting audience. And in May 2013, then Vice President Joe Biden delivered to the Council what he considers his most important speech on the region. Those of you who know me know I am going to speak candidly to the areas where we have made progress and where we face persistent challenges. But more importantly, our focus on an affirmative, partnership-based agenda as the guiding principle behind U.S. foreign policy. I'd like to begin by highlighting the administration's commitment to building up the Western Hemisphere as a stronghold for democracy. As a matter of policy, the United States will seek to find common cause with governments that are elected and which govern democratically, regardless of where they lie ideologically on the political spectrum. And unlike China, we view the role of civil society and a free media as indispensable, especially now as support for democracy has regrettably receded over the last decade. Our support for democratic institutions in Brazil is evidence of that approach, but nowhere was our vigilance more impactful than in Guatemala. Each time corrupt actors sought to subvert the democratic election of Bernardo Arevalo as Guatemala's next president, the administration deployed its full toolkit of diplomatics and sanctions tools at the highest levels. I myself traveled twice to Guatemala, but this was a whole of government effort where from the president on down, the administration were following developments and engaging in real time with the outgoing government and the full set of stakeholders clamoring for the will of the Guatemalan people to be respected. At the OAS General Assembly last June, we successfully introduced measures to strengthen the Inter-American Democratic Charter. The establishment of the new OAS voluntary group of member states, which we chair, to promote dialogue and cooperation and address democratic backsliding demonstrates our commitment to the Charter's full implementation. Our efforts to promote democracy not only focus on supporting democratic institutions, but also addressing the security and prosperity that democratically elected governments can deliver. Ecuador's new president, Daniel Noboa, took office amid a security and economic crisis. We have engaged in a sustained whole-of-government approach to support the Noboa administration's efforts to restore security, combat transnational criminal organizations, and make the economic reforms necessary to put the country's finances back on stable footing with the help of international financial institutions. Though much work remains, Ecuador appears to have turned the corner, and its citizens now see that democracy delivers results. Despite the widespread hemispheric consensus in favor of democracy, there are clear outliers in Haiti, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba. Helping Haiti restore security and democracy, especially at this critical moment, represents a top priority for the administration. I'll note that my delay in arriving here, I was with Secretary Blinken working on Haiti and calls to Prime Minister Ariel Henry and President Ali of Guyana, who's chairing CARICOM at this moment and is also one of the two elected members for GRULAC in the UN Security Council. So after President Moïse's tragic assassination, we determined to push Haiti's leaders to reach a consensus on meaningful elections to renew the government's constitutional mandate. Gangs backed by narco-traffickers and corrupt politicians resisted the democratic path, and the country descended into widespread violence, which prompted the government of Haiti to request a UN-authorized multinational security support mission, or MSS. We commend Kenya's willingness to lead this mission, as well as the country's offering police and logistical support. We appreciate CARICOM for engaging in intensive diplomacy in the last few days to resolve the latest crisis in Port-au-Prince. This diplomacy is made possible through thoughtfully and deliberately engaging our allies in the Caribbean, the region, and the world. During the February MSS mission ministerial in Rio, we were encouraged to see many countries step up to provide funding, particularly the 91.2 million US dollars from Canada. We continue calling for broad donor support for the mission, especially from the region in the form of funding, personnel, and in-kind assistance. The MSS must receive proper support to achieve its objectives. The United States has pledged to provide up to $200 million to support the MSS mission, including $100 million from the Department of State. The Department of Defense committed up to $100 million in in-kind support, including enabling logistics, equipment, billeting, basing, airlift, communications, and medical support. On Venezuela, we took a calculated risk, clear-eyed about who we were dealing with and the likelihood that the heirs of the legacy of Hugo Chavez would allow an election where they did not control the outcome. We ultimately concluded that the status quo was bad for the United States, good for our adversaries, and would not advance the cause of democracy. Because of our approach, all wrongfully detained Americans in Venezuela are home with their families. However, Maduro's refusal to reinstate the political rights of candidates like opposition primary winner Maria Corina Machado and the harassment and imprisonment of many of her supporters were steps in the wrong direction. Despite these recent transgressions, we remain committed to supporting Venezuela's democratic process and along with members of the international community to insist on the right of the Venezuelan opposition to choose its candidate and for the right of the Venezuelan people to choose their next president. In Nicaragua, we continue to hold the Ortega Murillo regime accountable for its repressive, anti-democratic actions, including the shuttering of more than 3,500 NGOs, including the Red Cross, silencing of civil society and independent media, and the unjust imprisonment of hundreds of Nicaraguans. While the United States cannot unilaterally remove Nicaragua from CAFTA-DR, there are national security stipulations in the agreement that allow us to impose powerful trade measures. Toward that end, our focus is on regime enablers and their revenue sources. Finally, in Cuba, our policy remains focused on minimizing support and resources for the Cuban government while maximizing support for the Cuban people. Or as the President has said, U.S. policy toward Cuba should be tough on the regime but soft on the people. We simply cannot abide by how Cuban authorities respond with repression to those who seek to peacefully exercise those freedoms, and approximately 1,000 unjustly detained political prisoners sit behind bars today. The Cuban government also profits from the forced labor of its workers, including medical professionals throughout the world, an unacceptable practice. For all these reasons, engagement on human rights issues remains at the center of our policy. We do, however, see a few green sprouts, reasons to be hopeful about Cuba. Cuba's independent private sector emerged as an alternative to the communist government's demonstrably failed model of central planning. These entrepreneurs now play a critical role in providing income to a population eager for work and sustenance, for families for whom the government is unable to provide. We continue to seek ways to support the Cuban people and its private sector. We can't speak of challenges in the hemisphere and not mention our adversaries' efforts to undermine democracy, security, and U.S. leadership in the region. The People's Republic of China continues to advance an alternative vision for global governance that represents a departure from many of the principles that lie at the heart of the international system. We work with partners in the region to understand their needs and priorities and explore how we can work together to address them. We invest in the foundations of our strength here at home, our competitiveness, our innovation, our democracy. We align our efforts with our network of allies and partners, acting with common purpose and in common cause. And harnessing these two key assets, we compete with China to defend our interests and build our vision for the future. Meanwhile, Russia's own assault on the rules-based international order has not only brought enormous suffering to the Ukrainian people, but also has undermined food security globally, including in our hemisphere. We actively raise concerns with our partners throughout the region. A central component of our democracy agenda is the need to promote inclusive economic growth and shared prosperity. Candidly, our biggest challenge has been the lack of tools to advance economic statecraft in a predominantly middle-income region. Part of our solution to that challenge is the Americas Partnership for Economic Prosperity, which the President announced at the 9th Summit of the Americas in June 2022, followed by hosting a highly successful Leaders Summit to advance the Americas Partnership in November of last year. The Americas Partnership provides us with a flexible platform to build concrete cooperation with like-minded partners on next-generation economic issues and create opportunities for people compelled to migrate through irregular channels. Regional leaders' enthusiasm for this initiative remains palpable, and the IDB's strong support will increase our reach and impact. I look forward to working with all of you to take full advantage of the Americas Partnership. Aside from the Americas Partnership, other initiatives and programs address the region's economic needs in ways that help the United States and our partners. In February 2023, the Vice President and the Partnership for Central America launched Central America Forward. Since its launch, companies have committed to invest over $4.2 billion in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, and deployed over $1 billion to the region. Many of these companies, even those that have operated previously, have made new significant commitments. Last June, we supported the partnership's launch of a Rule of Law pledge. The initial 10 signatories committed to conduct business operations in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, according to OECD standards. We remain encouraged to see the private sector take action to be a positive force for change. We have also deepened cooperation with one of our most vital partners, Mexico. Together, we work to reduce the record levels of regional migration, stem the flow of fentanyl, which killed nearly 108,000 Americans in 2023, and integrate North American supply chains. Mexico is now the United States' #1 trade partner. Our bilateral trade hit a record $800 billion in 2023. Over $1.5 million exchanged every minute. At the North American Leaders Summit in January 2023, we launched a public-private partnership to increase investment in North America's semiconductor supply chain, made joint commitments to reduce methane emissions, installed cross-border electric vehicle charging stations, and launched a trilateral fentanyl committee with Mexico and Canada to counter the flow of illicit synthetic drugs, illegal firearms in North America. During the summit, Secretary Blinken and the foreign ministers of Canada and Mexico also signed the North American Partnership for Equity and Racial Justice to build a more just, inclusive, and equitable society in our three democracies. In November 2023, along with partners in public and private sectors, we also launched the first 100,000 strong in the Americas competition that expands trilateral education cooperation and access to innovative, inclusive education exchanges between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Through the institutional architecture we have built, the United States Mexico-Canada Agreement, the North American Leaders Summit, high-level economic and security dialogues, and other initiatives, we continue to expand economic opportunity while building safer and more secure and inclusive communities for our peoples. Turning to another important partner, the United States continues to deepen cooperation with Brazil. On the margins of the UN General Assembly and meetings this past fall, Presidents Biden and Lula launched a partnership for workers' rights. Since then, we have engaged Brazil to implement programs combating forced labor in agricultural supply chains, promote labor rights in clean energy, and the gig economy, and combat workplace discrimination against LGBTQI+ and other marginalized workers. Also in Brazil, our CEO Forum, which brings together CEOs from both countries, held in December its first in-person meeting since 2019, leading to several tangible recommendations to strengthen supply chains, simplify the tax burden, and increase collaboration on food security and sustainable agriculture. Many of our programs throughout Brazil support underserved groups and communities. The Academy of Women Entrepreneurs is one example. In 2023, the Academy Exchange Program launched across 26 countries. Its impact reached 4,000 participants in current programs from urban, rural, and indigenous communities with the knowledge, networks, and access they need to launch and scale businesses. The administration also set a precedent for convening and engaging new stakeholder groups when we hosted the first ever City Summit of the Americas last April. President Biden announced our commitment to host this new forum during the 9th Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles, and we were proud to see more than 2,500 state, local, and indigenous government representatives and stakeholders answer the call to meet us in Denver. Secretary Blinken and I, alongside USTR Ambassador Tai, Ambassador Thomas Greenfield, and many others, saw the City Summit spark conversations on challenging topics ranging from welcoming migrant communities to combating climate change at the local level. I'm proud to say that the Dominican Republic, as host of the 10th Summit of the Americas, will convene the second City Summit, and we plan to deepen our investment in subnational diplomacy from the State Department in the coming months. Climate resiliency and environmental protection also remain a top U.S. priority, representing myriad opportunities for cooperation with our partners. In Ecuador, for example, the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation provided political risk insurance for a $656 million IDB loan to create a Galapagos marine conservation-linked bond. Through this debt conversion, Ecuador will realize more than $1.2 billion in lifetime savings through reduced debt service costs. It will also generate an estimated $323 million from marine conservation over the next 18 years. To build climate resiliency, President Biden announced he would request $500 million over 5 years for the Amazon Fund in the context of Brazil's renewed commitment to end deforestation by 2030. We have delivered the first small tranche of funding for the fund and are now working to secure higher funding levels to fulfill President Biden's commitment. Conscious of the Caribbean region's vulnerability to climate change impacts, in 2022, we launched, alongside Caribbean leaders, the U.S. Caribbean Partnership to Address the Climate Crisis 2030, or PAC 2030. Under this initiative, we help Caribbean countries accelerate their clean energy transitions and make Caribbean energies more resilient. Through PAC 2030, we have launched several new programs, including the Caribbean Climate Investment Program, for which USAID provided an initial $20 million to advise and support climate resilience and renewable energy investment firms in the Caribbean. Just last week in Guyana, at the 46th regular meeting of CARICOM heads of government, the United States highlighted more than $43 million in USAID funding, including $15.8 in previously unannounced funding to address climate and biodiversity threats. Moving forward from our Caribbean Basin Security Initiative ministerial in St. Lucia in November, we also continue to expand our cooperation with Caribbean partners to address illicit firearms tracking and transnational organized crime. Together with our partners, we have made critical advances on shared priorities, steady progress that paves the way for a more democratic, secure, and prosperous and inclusive Western Hemisphere. Nevertheless, we continue to face significant challenges and attempts to test our resolve and question U.S. leadership. Let me be clear, our commitment to the Western Hemisphere has not and will not falter. With our successes also come challenges, and that takes me to the overwhelming number of people across the Americas seeking a better life through migration. We and our regional and global partners have come together to seek sustainable and humane responses to the challenges and opportunities of migration. Under the Los Angeles Declaration on Migration and Protection, which has been endorsed by 22 countries in the region, we are for the first time confronting migration as a regional challenge and a shared responsibility. This means not only enforcing our own borders and opening up new lawful pathways, but also encouraging our partners in the region to do the same. I am pleased that in the coming months, Guatemala will host the next ministerial meeting of the Los Angeles Declaration. This builds off a successful trilateral meeting on migration management that Secretary Blinken hosted with counterparts from Mexico and Guatemala. The Biden-Harris administration has expanded lawful pathways for individuals from the region to a greater degree than ever before. But our message is clear. Avail yourself of those lawful pathways rather than making the dangerous journey north, since we will continue to robustly enforce our border. We have successfully launched safe mobility offices in Costa Rica, Guatemala, and Colombia, expanding access to lawful pathways for admission to the United States. We also expanded lawful pathways for Cubans to safely immigrate to the United States to reunite with family or to simply seek a more free and prosperous life. Our embassy in Havana has resumed full immigrant visa processing. And last year, DHS announced a new parole process to create additional safe, regular, and orderly processes for Cubans, Nicaraguans, and Haitians, expanding a parole program already in place for Venezuelans to lawfully come to the United States for a temporary period. The outflow of refugees and migrants from Venezuela represents the largest displacement crisis in the world. Indeed, one of the most persistent and multifaceted challenges we continue to face is the crisis in Venezuela. In the dynamic landscape that is Latin America and the Caribbean, challenges and opportunities intertwine, shaping the region's trajectory. Political instability, corruption, and violence pose significant hurdles, encouraging irregular migration and hindering economic development and democratic progress. However, amidst these challenges, there are promising opportunities. Investment in climate resiliency, regional cooperation with like-minded partners that share our values, and educational exchanges foster resilience and growth. We navigate this intricate terrain, strategic diplomacy and collaboration. As we navigate this intricate terrain, strategic diplomacy and collaboration become essential for realizing a brighter future for communities across the hemisphere. The Council's role as a catalyst for promoting development and integration in the region and emphasizing the role of the private sector remains critical to advancing our shared goals. We look forward to continuing our partnership with the Council, and I look forward to the conversation.
We'll do the switcheroo here. I will make sure that you have the fresh water. That's always something to remember, ladies and gentlemen.
So which one has the iocane powder in it?
Well, I won't tell you. You'll have to figure it out. Brian, thank you very much. And again, thank you so much for keeping this appointment. It's a really busy time, in terms of Haiti, so many other things. Let's start with what's on the minds of a lot of people, not necessarily Latin America watchers, but tonight the president offers remarks on the State of the Union. If he were to give remarks on the state of the Americas, what do you think he might say?
Well, I tried to address a lot of what he would say in these remarks. But I think the heart of our region is that we have incredible partnerships. And whether Canada, Mexico, Brazil, the renewed partnership with Argentina, and we had a great visit down there. Our incredible relations with countries in the Caribbean, working together, really shoulder to shoulder to deal with the crisis in Haiti, dealing with the democratic challenges in Nicaragua and in Venezuela. This really is a hemisphere of partnership, and that makes a big, big difference. When you look at all of the trouble around the world, we have our share in our region, but I think we have a shared set of values and a shared approach and a shared commitment that no region in the world can match.
Mm-hmm. Based on that, you just came from a meeting with the Secretary on Haiti. Several questions that we took in advance of this session did focus on Haiti. What's next? You obviously have latest developments. If you want to make news, by the way, now's the time to do it on Haiti. But having said that, one of the things that you alluded to in your remarks was the need for international cooperation, collaboration. You called out Canada. You've got the Kenya initiative, et cetera. And I guess the question is, what can the international community do together on Haiti? It's such a complicated scenario. The United States, we've got so many other things going on. How do you organize that coalition to make a meaningful difference in a country that is desperate for some sort of peaceful resolution to what really is a crisis?
Well, I think there are a number of things. We and key partners are working to provide urgent assistance to the Haitian National Police to deal with the critical problem of gang violence that's happening right now. The broader challenge is forging an inclusive government that can take the country to elections. And Secretary Blinken has led those efforts. He's, 2 years ago, he was talking to Prime Minister Ariel Henry about the need for a more inclusive government that includes many more political forces and has the breadth to take the country through the electoral period. We've continued to stress that and to support Haitian stakeholders in coming together and trying to negotiate a way forward. I was honored to be with Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield in Guyana, where we reinforced those conversations and worked really shoulder to shoulder with our host, President Ali, with Prime Minister Motley, and the range of CARICOM leaders on these issues. And CARICOM has been working tirelessly since then to try and forge and support a consensus among Haitians going forward. Secretary Blinken spoke with President Ali and with Prime Minister Henry about the urgent need to accelerate transition to a broader, more inclusive government today. And those were intensive conversations. I told you that I thought I would be here significantly earlier than I actually arrived. And that's because it was repeated calls, really thoughtful, deep conversations, trying to move things forward. And we're deeply grateful to our partners in CARICOM in particular for their tireless efforts.
And while we're on the topic, do you see, or what could be a solution to help address some of the deteriorating security scenario, right? Because the Haitian people are the ones who ultimately pay the price. You personally and the State Department, you've been in some really productive and effective discussions, I believe, in terms of Kenya and all that, but you really do have a deteriorating situation on the ground. They need help now. How do you address that?
Well, first step, trying to provide additional equipment to the Haitian National Police, working to reinforce the resources that Haiti's government has to address this challenge, but more broadly, speeding the deployment of a multinational security support mission to Haiti. That is crucial. And that means making sure that the contributions in terms of financing, logistics, mobility, personnel are all in place. And I think the meeting that the Secretary co-chaired in Rio on the margins of the G20 helped advance that. In addition to Canada's generous financial pledge, Benin offered as many as 2,000 peacekeepers themselves, where there are already pledges from a number of countries in the Caribbean, as well as expressions of interest depending on what the additional needs are from other countries in Latin America and in Africa. as well as financial pledges from Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. All of that needs to be accelerated. The efforts that have been made thus far are vital and important, and we've been proud to be the largest donor to the effort. But we've got to do more, and we've got to do more urgently. The crisis in Haiti, it has the humanitarian proportions that demand a global response, the way the international community is responding to the challenges in Ukraine or in Gaza.
It's a really interesting point, and I haven't heard it put quite that way, but I think that's effective framing of what truly is a much bigger issue than, quote unquote, just a national issue. No, it clearly has broader implications. I'd love to discuss this more, but we have a whole lot of other topics to get to as well. And I know that folks are interested in some of the broader conversations on democracy. Haiti's one example, but look, I mean, democracy's promotion is never easy. We've been in this game, you in official government, me sort of outside, and others in this room, using all the tools available over time to try to promote democracy, but it's never easy. It seems to have gotten more difficult in recent years. Outside actors, you alluded to some, you mentioned some in your remarks. We didn't talk about social media or these sorts of issues, but I think those are very relevant, et cetera. Does the United States, because I think we all would agree that promotion of democracy is in the US interest, would we agree that the US has the appropriate tools at this stage in history to be able to do that effectively? I mean, it's a genuine question. I mean, because the threats evolve. Have our tools kept up with our ability to address some of these real challenges? And you mentioned Ecuador, you mentioned Guatemala, Brazil. You don't go down the list. It's really an interesting time.
Well, I think the Biden and Harris administration has really tried to focus on new tools, things like expanding access to the internet, to mobile education, new job opportunities, to help the economies grow from the bottom up and from the middle out, has been a priority for this administration. And you saw that highlighted in the pillars of the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles. And you're one of the founders of the Summit of the Americas process. So I think seeing that continue to be leveraged and then built on through the OAS General Assembly, the OAS process, America's partnership, all of those things are important economic and political tools. But the resources that we bring to bear to address these challenges, this is a difficult moment, and we're asking the American people and the U.S. Congress to provide ample resources to address these challenges. I was really struck by the conversation between President Biden and President Lula when they first met. Well, that was not their first meeting, their first Oval Office meeting. And their shared experiences on January 6th and January 8th in the respective countries and the threats to democracy that even large established democracies face means that we all have to be vigilant together. This is not a process where the United States can just deliver stone tablets on high, but this is a process where we all have to work together, and we face threats just like other countries face threats to democracy, and we have to work together. And the collaboration that we've seen, I think, in rebuilding the regional and international consensus around the importance of a democratic path forward in Venezuela, for example, where now it's very clear that the Maduro side is failing to deliver on the commitments that it made in the Barbados Agreement, permitting the opposition to choose its own candidate, harassment of Vente Venezuela campaign workers, arrest of at least 37 people since then. Those are all clear signs, and we see a much more solid regional and global response to that, I would argue, than we would have a few years back. So I think that's a major example. In my remarks, I talked about Guatemala and in Ecuador, about how we've worked with other partners to try and support democracy in those countries. And we're going to continue to do that regardless of where governments lie in the ideological spectrum, but really focus on, are you did you come to power democratically, and are you governing democratically?
Because you mentioned Venezuela, let's stay with that for just a minute. And it's so important in the overall scheme of the broader hemispheric agenda. There have been some developments over the last week. You have a date now set for elections. We have upcoming in April the deadline in terms of the sanctions snapback or not. That's a decision the administration will have to take. We also have the continued disqualification of the candidate of the opposition that was chosen freely in a primaries process. So it's almost an impossibly difficult situation. So let me ask you, what do we do from here? Where do you go from here? I mean, you have just a few months for the opposition really to organize elections that I think, these are my words, not yours, but not going to be free and fair, but based on current provisions. How do we advance the cause of democracy effectively in the current scenario? Barbados is not compelling the Maduro administration or Maduro regime to take any meaningful steps at all.
So I think we have to be very clear that the incentives that we and I think others in the international community have put on the table to move toward a competitive election in Venezuela have not been sufficient to motivate reforms and openness that the Maduro side believes would put their government or their governance, their administration at risk. And when you see the number of votes that Maria Corina Machado received in the opposition primary versus the number of votes that the 5 items received in the Essequibo referendum, I think that sent a chilling message to the Maduro side. I think the polls that I think many of the people who are here with us or online have seen make it clear that there's a hunger for change in Venezuela. And Venezuelans should have the opportunity to exercise their free will and suffrage. It's on the democratically inclined parties in Venezuela to come together around a way forward. I firmly believe that when we're dealing with partners around the region, it's the people in those countries should be the ones who are setting their own fate and determining things, and our role is to support them in that effort. And so we'll be taking our cues from the democratic opposition in Venezuela about the way forward. While the clock is, well, maybe I shouldn't characterize what you said, but the timelines are tight, and we don't want to prejudge how things will turn out, but the direction of travel is deeply worrisome, and we look to working with democratic actors in Venezuela and our partners around the region to determine, well, how do we respond to a country that is not respecting the democratic norms that we all hold dear. And whether you're in Colombia or Brazil or Guyana or Suriname or, I'll just rattle off all the other countries in South America or in the Caribbean, all of the leaders of those places stand for elections. They have international observers. They have a transparent process, and people get to pick. So I think that the leaders of those nations should continue to deliver the message that the Venezuelan people deserve the same opportunity to make a choice, and that a true leader stands for election and respects the decision of the people.
I think that's a really important and powerful point that you just made. In fact, that was going to be my follow-up question. Do you sense in other Democrats around the region the level of support and engagement that would be helpful to the extent possible? Again, this is on the ground in Venezuela. There's only so much influence people from the outside can exercise, but that is helping to drive toward as much of a positive outcome as possible. And the message you just delivered, I think, is very positive and frankly very helpful, I think, in the current moment. Let's change course a little bit from specific countries to again tools of engagement. You mentioned in your remarks, which we appreciated very much, you raised the economic agenda. Council of the Americas is an economic and trade and financial group, think tank, but also trade association. These issues are very close to our heart. We joke sometimes that trade isn't the most popular topic to discuss in Washington, et cetera. We get that. But at the same time, if you take economics and trade engagement off the table, that's a powerful tool that oftentimes can't be replicated through other means. And so I guess the question would be, in the current environment, you mentioned the president's engagement at the Summit of the Americas, the APEP. We have an election year now. I'm not going to ask you to get involved in U.S. electoral politics, but simply to say it complicates the overall agenda. What could we usefully be engaging in today in terms of economic engagement in the region to help drive those positive results that will help support democracy, will reduce the urge to migrate, will do all the things that I think we all want in a favorable and appropriate way? The Senate and the Congress just released yesterday the Americas Act. That's another approach. I mean, how can we be moving forward together in real economic partnership with the region, which is what we hear all the time from interlocutors? That's what what folks really are looking for.
So there are a lot of things. One of the things that really struck me about our trip to Argentina, I was there twice in 2 weeks, and Argentina is a country that has so much potential and so many possibilities that haven't been fully realized. And the conversation that we had with President Milei, his willingness to really reach out and strengthen the economic relationship and partnership with the United States, I think, is incredibly welcome. And he's got a cabinet full of economists. So fascinating meeting for an economics major.
Too many jokes come to the fore, but anyway.
But critical minerals, for example, is an unexploited opportunity in Argentina. And when you look at the potential production for critical minerals and how that can integrate into North American supply chains and the opportunities that are there, that really struck us as something that we need to deepen. And more broadly, renewable energy. We're going to have a renewable energy dialogue with Argentina and put that into a broader context. Obviously, Argentina also has significant, shall we say, traditional energy reserves that could be better taken advantage of as we migrate to renewables. And then you look at the work in a country like Chile, where there are many of the same resources, but they're significantly ahead in the exploitation of those resources. That's another great partnership in our region. As we look at the challenges in Central America around providing people good opportunities and reasons to stay at home, there are things that we can do to promote better jobs and trade and non-tariff related investments and advantages in Central America. Guatemala has tremendous potential. And Central America Forward and the Partnership for Central America have really represented great ways to increase investment, and President Areva's focus now on not just having that general investment in Guatemala, but directing that investment to communities and areas that have traditionally been left behind, and as a result have generated outward migration. And we think that's a great idea. The opportunities in Costa Rica. I mean, Costa Rica is really operating at a sort of a significant technological advantage to many other countries in the region, whether it's pharmaceuticals or semiconductors. They're doing things that others aren't doing, certainly in Central America, and that's an opportunity to link them up with us. We have complementary business opportunities there. And the one that is huge and we often forget, though we shouldn't when we're talking about our region, is Canada. Canada is an incredible partner for the United States at every single level. And the commerce and trade between our two nations is enormous. Many Canadian and U.S. companies have branches on the other side of the border, and we have a lot of opportunities with Canada. And we also have some fence mending issues that we have to resolve with Canada, and we want to do that going forward as partners and friends as we jointly take on challenges within our region and around the world. They're a key partner, obviously, in Ukraine, for example, or in the Pacific.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We don't have a whole lot of time remaining. We have probably about 10 minutes, and we had some questions that we can take now. But as we're doing that, Brian, and again, thank you. I mean, we're doing a tour d'horizon. We're all over the place, right? And you're handling these questions like they're second nature, but they're actually quite complicated in and of themselves, and yet you've got a whole different variety of them. Let's stay with the economic side for just a minute, but put it in a slightly different context. You mentioned China, and you talked about the influence in terms of democracy and authoritarian governance, et cetera, and the U.S. desire and willingness and ability to compete. Let's put it in the economic environment in terms of supply chains and the attractiveness of Latin America and the Caribbean as investment destinations. So coming out of the pandemic, there was a whole lot of attention on supply chain resiliency, and there was, I guess, just an assumption folks would move out of China, because that's where lots of the PPE and other things were sourced from, to come to the Western Hemisphere. We've seen some of that. In my view, we should see more of it. And I guess the question is, what are some things that we can be doing, should be doing? The Secretary of Commerce, for example, will be in Costa Rica in a couple of weeks on the supply chains, but also the computer chips issue. I mean, that's huge. That a country in Central America is being seen in that way, and potentially a partner in North American trade, USMCA, et cetera. I mean, this is really a big deal. Are there other things that we can be doing in that context that you see from your State Department perspective?
Well, the U.S. is the largest source of foreign direct investment in Brazil and Argentina, many other countries in the region. And the difference between our economic relationship and China is that our investments and our business relationships generate high-paying quality jobs. And frankly, most of the economic relations that China is involved in terms of economic activity in the region, it is basic commodities, and they're not really improved, and they're not yielding high-paying jobs or transformation in those countries. So that's one thing that strikes me. But what more could we do? Certainly increase resources for Development Finance Corporation, for example, to help further seed investment and provide the resources that we need. I think they're doing some great work there, but we need to be more agile. Yeah. We need to deliver for our companies more quickly. We need to provide, the insurance that they need around investment, the credit. We need to make sure that there may be a deal that's close, but there's a little bit of a risk. We shouldn't be afraid, as Secretary likes to say, we shouldn't be afraid to get caught trying. And I think we can do that more there. Leveraging the Inter-American Development Bank and IDB Invest is a great tool, and we've pledged to increase our contribution to IDB Invest. But more broadly, greater capitalization for the Inter-American Development Bank, the World Bank, becoming a shareholder of the Caribbean Development Bank. Those are all ways that we could increase our presence in lending and economic opportunity in the region. The Summit of Small Island and Developing States is going to take place in the Caribbean this year in Antigua and Barbuda. That's an opportunity to enlist those who are at greatest risk for climate change and often get left behind in the global conversation, and engage them and think about what are new ways and new opportunities that we can provide financing, that we can mitigate the risks that they face from extreme weather events, which we know are much more expensive to rebuild after than they are to prevent. How do we address those challenges? I think those things are all crucial. And as we're doing through America's partnership, really look at those non-tariff barriers to increase economic integration and dismantle those through things like customs harmonization, job training, labor market planning, those types of things.
Those aren't sexy topics, but they drive markets.
Yeah.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
And we deal with the private sector. That's our primary constituency, and this is what they're always telling us. Right, fix some of these issues at the local level, the regulatory issue level, the infrastructure level, and you'd be surprised how much investment might materialize. One point that you mentioned, and also in your formal remarks in terms of DFC, I'm so glad you mentioned the DFC, the Development Finance Corporation. Bringing it together with what you mentioned in your remarks about the ability to engage with certain countries based on income levels. That's a fundamental point. It's an own goal that we drew the income levels at the wrong level so that we have to exclude much of Latin America and even some of the Caribbean. And that's an easy legislative fix, you would think. Congress? So that's something that certainly we would support. And if you can unlock some of those tools, and it's just because we didn't conceptualize it correctly. Well, we can fix that. So why aren't we, right? So that's my editorial commentary, not yours, but thank you for raising those topics as well. Brian, it's always the last question, and I think we're coming up to pretty close to our time. So I'm not going to ask the question exactly how it was written, but because you're not going to get involved in somebody else's, political moment and that sort of thing. But Mexico is going through an election right now, and the question would be, coming out of Mexico's elections, indeed coming out of the U.S. elections, because we have our own campaigns going on this year. What would you envision? What would you hope to see in the context of a bilateral relationship between the U.S. and Mexico under the next two presidents, whoever they are? Is that a fair question? I mean, because we're not going to talk about individual candidates, but how do you get to where we want to be so that all of these partnerships and connectivity and happy things that we've been talking about, how do they actually transpire?
I think approaching the relationship and our shared border as an opportunity to be taken advantage of and not a problem to be solved is vital. We're talking about our largest economic partner on Earth.
Yes.
So this is bigger than China, bigger than Canada. So let's look at it like a tremendous opportunity on both sides of the border. Better jobs for Americans, better jobs for Mexicans, greater investment. But let's also focus on the challenges that we face. We've got to address irregular migration. And while Mexico's doing very well, Mexicans are still a big chunk of the people who arrive irregularly in the United States. So increasing economic opportunity and reasons to stay, and working between the next, whoever the U.S. president is and whoever the Mexican president is, for those two people to work together and make sure that there are opportunities in the communities that send migrants from Mexico is important. Working together to address the hemispheric flow, where Mexico is the last stop before they arrive at the United States, is also vital. Mexico should be and is an incredible partner in renewable energy, manufacturing, climate change issues, addressing the environment, a whole host of issues. And working together on those is vital, and how Mexico feeds into the broader North American supply chain are issues. And then hopefully I'd like to see us work together even more closely to address the challenges we face throughout the hemisphere, whether it's democracy, whether it's migration, whether it's climate change, and on a global level. And Mexico really is, continues to grow as a global power, and its wealth, its population are all sending a message. And this is an important opportunity for Mexican and U.S. leaders to work together bilaterally and within the context of the North American Leaders Summit to deal with these global challenges in addition to the North American challenges that we face.
I think it's a fabulous message, and truthfully, bringing it back to kind of our own administration, you can't get, in my view, you can't get to a foreign policy for the middle class and not fundamentally include Mexico in that conversation, because all those issues you just talked about affect the U.S. middle class, and everybody else for that matter, but but the middle class. If I were a journalist, I would say, well, I've asked you a lot of questions, you've answered a lot, but what have I forgotten to ask you? What did you prepare that you want, the last message or the last thing that you want to say that I might not have asked you? Do you have a final word for us today?
Well, I would echo your comments at the top. There's no region that's more important for the United States than the Western Hemisphere. This is our home, and we've made great progress here. We still have tremendous challenges that we need to address. Internationally, this is a time of, I'm trying to think of when I've seen so much international tumult, and we're now old enough to kind of remember that in the past, but like I haven't seen a land war in Europe or Middle East war at the same time. Challenges democracy in our hemisphere, and then the existential threat of climate change. We're dealing with a lot of really big issues on our plates, and we have to. One of the things that the president says that I really agree with is, we're the United States of America. When we work together, there is nothing that we can't do. And I would sort of put a corollary that with our partners in the Western Hemisphere, there's nothing that we can't do, and let's strengthen that partnership with our friends and allies in the Western Hemisphere.
Terrific concluding remarks, and I think you would not get any hint of disagreement from anybody in this audience, and I trust online as well. What a great message. Brian, thank you for your time, your message today that you brought to us, but also thank you, frankly, for your leadership. I've been in government, not as an assistant secretary, but these are hard jobs and oftentimes thankless. And truthfully, you're dealing with some issues that many people would rather not have to deal with. You're doing it day to day, night to night sometimes, and you're doing it well. We really appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks for your leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please join me in thanking Brian for his terrific comments today. And Andrea, my effective assistant, reminded me we have instituted since the beginning of the year the ASCOA Challenge Coin.
Oh, wow.
And so those who speak to the organization receive one of these, but only those who speak. So if you've been to the National Press Club, you get the mug. If you be somewhere else, you get their, but we are two sides of the same coin, literally. So here we go. Thank you again. Ladies and gentlemen, this will dismiss us. Thank you very much.